Hi everyone, my name is Kate. Before I get started, just like super quick disclaimer. So this is meant in no way to be advocating for green burial. I am of the mind that death is super personal and you should make your own choices about it. That being said, there is a lot of information about the perceived benefits of green burial in here though. So I should probably start with explaining like what is green burial? What am I talking about here? So green or natural burial is a sort of movement that emerged about 10 years ago in response to the standard burial traditions, which actually are not that traditional. Technically, the green way is the traditional way until about the 1800s during the Civil War, when soldiers far from home died and their families wanted their bodies returned to them. As a result of that, embalming became very popular, and the sort of social idea of really protecting your loved ones as much as possible after their death, which is why we now have vaults, also to allow for landscaping and very ornate caskets as well. And so the green burial movement really shuns all of this. No vaults, no embalming. All of the casket or shroud materials are biodegradable, and there's very minimal landscaping. So you can kind of see here, like this is the traditional funeral way, and then that is from a green burial site down in North Carolina. So this all makes sense if you're really into like being eco-friendly, but like why would people be interested in green burial other than that? And here I've outlined the 3 pillars of sustainability. So, first, of course, there is the environmental reason for green burial. It uses way less materials and resources than a standard burial does. But then in addition to that, a big part of green burial is returning your nutrients to the soil. So with standard burial, your nutrients are basically like locked up in a box for a very long time before ever returning to the process. And of course, with cremation, they're burnt so they don't return. And so that's a really big part of it, is having your body go back into that nutrient cycle. But in addition to that, there's also there's a lot of economic benefits. Like unfortunately today, the average cost of a funeral here in America is like $10,000 or more. But of course, with green burial, you're not paying for the vault, you're not paying for embalming, and the casket or shroud is typically made of materials that are much cheaper, so pine or wicker and things like that. So you're cutting a lot of costs, like right off the bat with that. But then there's also the really interesting social aspect of green burial. So a lot of green burial advocates also include a more participatory involvement in burial in general with green burial. So that could mean, washing or taking care of the body, or even participating in digging or filling in the grave itself. And there's been a lot of feedback from people who say that this is like a really, really powerful experience for them, for connecting to the land and also to their loved one. So there's some really interesting social aspects to it, especially in today's society where I would say generally death does not come up very much in normal conversation. So where can you be buried in a green and natural way? This movement is still pretty young. It's really only about 10 years old, and it's been a slow growing one. It's not exactly an easy topic to bring up all the time. But there is a Green Burial Council, which is a nationwide nonprofit that has certification standards for different green burial areas. And so currently they have sort of these 3 categories that even outside their certification standards, a lot of people have used these to sort of set up green burial sites. So first there's hybrid burial grounds, and this is a picture of Mount Auburn, which is a beautiful cemetery in Boston. And so these are just like traditional cemeteries where you can be buried in a green way. There is like more landscaping, obviously, and things like that. But it is a great way to sort of raise awareness about it, and also, if you already are in an area that doesn't have one of these more intense areas, you might have a hybrid burial ground near you. But then there's a natural burial ground, so these are more intensive. It's an entire area that's only green burial with, of course, all these restrictions, and also typically includes a management plan of some kind to restore the area, because a big part of it is, improving the soil, improving the land by giving back to it. And then finally, what I was very interested in coming into this project are conservation burial grounds. So these are all the restrictions of this, but with the added aspect of having a conservation easement or deed restriction on the land to in perpetuity to forever protect it, which I think is like a very impactful way of honoring both the people and the land in that site. So that being said, since I turned in my abstract for this project, my project has actually totally changed a little bit. Originally, I was really interested in seeing about if Vermont and Vermont Land Trust, my partner, was interested in setting up a conservation burial ground here in Vermont. And they definitely are, but Vermont hasn't even really reached the point of these two things yet. Like, we're just starting to have a couple hybrid burial grounds. There are no natural burial grounds that I know of, and there's only 7 certified conservation burial grounds in the US, and none of them are near us. Although we do have one uncertified one just across the lake called Spirit Sanctuary in Essex, New York, that's really beautiful. So, I talked with Vermont Land Trust, and we're thinking about this because it doesn't really make sense to jump straight into this when we don't even have this yet. But Vermont is in this really interesting, unique place where even though green burial was only just sort of legalized by the state in 2015, and actually couldn't even be implemented until 2017 when they changed the burial depth to allow for shallower burials so that decomposition could happen. Typically it's 5 feet, they raised it up to 3.5 feet. Vermont also has this like long standing statute that allows you to bury immediate family members on your land. Which is why there's almost 2,000 cemeteries all across Vermont, which is a lot. And then we also still have Vermont Land Trust, who also owns about through conservation easements, has conserved about 10% of all of the state of Vermont. So we've got a lot of people interested in land who also have the ability to bury their loved ones on their land that are probably in some way connected or know about Vermont Land Trust, which is why I'm really interested in seeing how Vermont Land Trust can support these people who might be interested in having green burial on their property. It's still such a new thing that most people don't know about it, but with the number of conservation easements that we have here in Vermont, I think it could be a really interesting project and sort of material to produce and resource to produce. So that is why I am working with Vermont Land Trust right now to provide standards, conservation easement language, and then also sort of the physical requirements that they need to know for landowners who are interested in having a conservation burial or green burial on conserved land, so with a conservation easement on it. And they have actually already gotten requests from multiple landowners about like whether they could do this. So they're interested, but of course they're not in the death care industry, so they're like, we don't know what we're doing with this. Which is why I'll be working with them to create a guide for Vermont Land Trust, but I'll also be working to create a guide for the landowners as well, because of course there is the side to this of green burial, which Vermont Land Trust is not in the death care industry, but I can connect them to people who are, and also providers who can provide them with natural shrouds, caskets, things like that. So coming up with partners and resources, and hopefully I'm still looking into creating a conservation burial ground. I think that is something that will come to Vermont eventually, and I really hope it does. So still looking into the overall thing, but narrowing it down now to really see how we can help private landowners right now rather than 10 years in the future. Thank you. Oh, and huge thanks to Vermont Land Trust and my contact there, Tyler Miller, Green Burial Council, Vermont Green Burial, and Michelle. She helped me out a lot with that. And they also do death cafes in Montpelier. I highly recommend. They're really fun. And then, of course, my advisor, Claire, and my other committee member, Jess.